Medically, there was nothing more to be done. I was truly defaced by wounds, no hair anymore.
But the depression got so bad afterward, particularly the suicidal thoughts, that a year after I started this training, I tried to take my life for the first time.
And at some point I also started drinking.
I lay down on my bed and I prayed with all my heart, "Dear God, if you do exist, then please help me. I can't go on like this."
Then my brother came along and told me about Bruno Gröning.
I took in this power and experienced something wonderful when doing so. I could feel how something flowed through my body.
What happened then, that was for me the real success in my life. Yeah, I'm at a loss for words.
It is not easy to grow up in a time when not only the younger generation asks whether God has forgotten about them.
We, the young people in the Bruno Gröning circle of friends, wrote this book to show what we as children of this time have experienced in terms of burdens and questions and help and miracles.
I had severe atopic eczema since I was born. This is a skin disease with eczema over the whole body. I was hit very hard. I constantly suffered from severe, intolerable itching, and a lot of spots on my skin were scratched open and sore. Of course, this was easy to see. This bothered me a lot, especially during my adolescence. I felt shunned by my contemporaries.
Man kommt sich immer ein bisschen ausgestoßen vor. Ich hatte allergisches Asthma.
I had allergic asthma, which sometimes resulted in choking fits, and these diseases prohibited any contacts with animals, which was very painful for me. I was only able to have contact with animals when using cortisone or some other medication. My body broke down considerably during my youth. I joined in lots of things other teenagers were doing as well. I smoked and often drank on the weekends.
Oft getrunken am Wochenende, war nächtelang.
I hung out in discos all night long, causing more damage to my body and health. I felt worse and worse. The eczema got worse. The asthma got worse as well. When I finished high school, I thought about what I could do and just wanted a good job to earn a lot of money and enjoy life to the degree I was able to do. Also with medication, as I couldn't live without it. I then accepted a well-paid job with a pharmaceutical firm.
Ich habe dann einen gut bezahlten Job angenommen bei einer Pharmafirma. Den habe ich einige Jahre ausgeübt.
I worked there for several years. Of course, I had access to many medications which one did not have to buy and forced my body to fulfill my needs as far as this was possible.
Ich habe meinen Körper gezwungen, meinen Bedürfnissen zu genügen, so wie es eben möglich war.
Until finally I collapsed. On top of the eczema, I developed an autoimmune illness. Within a few weeks, I lost all my hair over my whole body. Medically, there was nothing to be done.
Medizinisch konnte man dagegen nichts mehr machen. Ich war also wirklich entstellt.
I was truly defaced by wounds, no hair anymore. Then my boyfriend broke up with me. He truly couldn't stand the sight of me any longer. Not long after that, I lost my job, since the company could no longer tolerate my employment while I was in this condition.
Mich weiter zu beschäftigen in diesem Zustand. Und habe so belastet.
With these burdens, I found my way to the Bruno Gröning circle of friends. During an information lecture about the teaching of Bruno Gröning, I learned that healing on the spiritual path is possible, and that there is a healing power which one can take in and which is able to bring bodily dysfunction back into order and to heal the body.
Und den Körper gesund zu machen Und mein Körper war damals unheilbar krank.
And my body was incurably ill by that time. I could not imagine how this was supposed to work. It seemed like a fairy tale, but I felt so miserable that I would have clutched at any straw just to obtain a little help. I took in this force and experienced something wonderful when doing so. I could feel how something flowed through my body.
Wie etwas durch meinen Körper geströmt ist.
I perceived how I suddenly had an inexplicable feeling of happiness, which seemed irrational, as outwardly nothing had changed in the last 5 minutes. But I felt fantastic and I sensed joy inside.
Aber ich habe mich sehr gut gefühlt und ich habe eine Freude in mir gespürt. Bin dazu übergegangen, diese Kraft regelmäßig aufzunehmen.
I proceeded to take in this power regularly and truly experience the healing of my body within a very short period of time. I no longer needed any medication. I stopped smoking without any withdrawal symptom. And by gaining my health, I also had a joyful sense of life.
Ich habe dann beschlossen, vieles in meinem Leben umzustellen.
I decided to change a lot of things in my life. I was able to realize my lifelong wish, which was impossible to fulfill before. I began to study veterinary medicine, and I'm about to graduate.
Kurz vor meinem Studienabschluss.
I am in close daily contact with animals and enjoy it. I do not suffer from any allergies anymore. My skin has healed well, my hair grew back again, and I may record and gather animal success reports for the Bruno Gröning circle of friends. And it is amazing what healings happen that are absolutely inexplicable from a veterinary medical point of view.
Wir haben Heilungen von Krebs.
We have healings from cancer. Outstanding is a healing from a sarcoid skin tumor on a horse, which disappeared without any human or medical help. And the horse is still healthy today.
Ja, das macht große Freude, solche.
It is a great pleasure to read these reports, to record them, especially when one is confronted daily in veterinary medicine with the pathology of how diseases emerge, how they spread, and that they increase. And then, on the other hand, these reports prove that it does not have to be like that it can be different, that there is no incurable, and this is also applicable for animals. And that the human being can contribute by having the right attitude, so that not only human beings, but also the creatures around us are better off, doing better, and are well.
Dem Menschen selbst, sondern auch seinen Geschöpfen, die um ihn herum sind, besser geht, wieder gut geht. Ich bin glücklich, diesen Weg.
I am happy that I have found this path. Not for anything in the world would I like to go back to the way I was before, and I am greatly looking forward to the life before me.
Bruno Gröning. What sort of man was Bruno Gröning? And what is the teaching of Bruno Gröning about? To describe him in a few sentences is as impossible as to explain his work. For that reason, we wish to give an account of some impressions from Bruno Gröning's life in between our own experience reports. Danzig, now Gdansk. This is where Bruno Gröning was born. He used to answer the question of where he gained his skills and his knowledge with a story of an experience from his childhood. When he was a little boy, he ran away from home into the woods. There he wanted to complain to God about the coldness and harshness of people and asked God to take him back to heaven. He received an answer, and at the same time, his mission in life. Namely, the mission to fight against the evil and to overcome it with the good. After that, he no longer avoided people, but went to them and told them that God exists, that he is very kind, and that he wants to help.
All people, no matter what religion, nation, or skin color, are worthy of being helped.
Bruno Gröning said that God is life and nature itself, and that one can find and experience him in everything.
Love life, God. God is everywhere.
He called plants and animals his little brothers and sisters, and often animals recovered solely through his attention to them. He understood the human body as a great gift from God, which one has to take care of lovingly for your whole life. Being a simple man, he was a stranger to all artificiality, so his self-conception was also simple.
I am but a human being who has remained natural.
He wasn't interested in other titles or roles.
Those who have had the great fortune to gain back their health through me should thank God from the bottom of their heart. I am only his tool and servant.
Ich bin seit 14 Jahren im Versicherungsaußendienst tätig.
For 14 years I've been working as a field sales representative for an insurance company, and I've also witnessed some of my clients' destinies. I would like briefly here to tell about my own destiny. My attention was drawn to Bruno Gröning about 13 years ago by my mother, who was severely sick at the time, and among other things, she was threatened with the need for a wheelchair.
Ich sah irgendwann ein Bruno Gröning-Bild im Wohnzimmer meiner Eltern.
Eventually I saw a picture of Bruno Gröning in my parents' living room and wondered, what is this? And I also saw that my mother was getting better. Finally, she told me what this was all about, and I was very skeptical and also rather tended towards atheism.
Ich habe nicht geglaubt, was mit Gott zu tun hat oder was mit
I did not believe in anything related to God or anything spiritual, but there was the fact, and I could not blind myself to it, that my mother had been healed. And skeptical as I was, I allowed myself to be convinced during an information lecture and experienced there many things happening in my own body.
dort selber auch erlebt.
I sensed heat waves going up and down my entire body. I felt alternating hot and cold, and after that I experienced many things in my life turning around to the good.
Daraufhin in dieser Zeit erlebt, dass viele Dinge in meinem Leben sich auch zum Glück
For instance, I used to have severe migraines, which occurred regularly once a month, and each time I had to stay in bed for 1 or 2 days.
die mich auch jedes Mal 1 bis 2 Tage ins Bett fesselten.
I also suffered from chronic tonsillitis, particularly in winter. I also smoked a lot back then, 1 to 1.5 packs a day, and these things bothered me tremendously. When I was introduced, I experienced that the migraine attacks disappeared within 6 to 9 months. The tonsillitis never occurred again, and what was the greatest surprise for me at the time was that I was able to stop smoking from one day to the next. And I really must say that this happened without any symptoms of addiction or withdrawal. It simply disappeared from one day to the next, and I don't think that is usual.
Und ich habe hier im Freundeskreis
I got to know the people here in the circle of friends and experienced how loving the atmosphere is here among them. And so my inner attitude changed. I met my wife here in the circle of friends, and today we have 3 children. The thought of having my own children used to frighten me. Today, I feel different. The task of raising children and giving them as much good as possible is a truly lovely one.
auf den Weg zu geben, ist schon eine schöne Aufgabe.
1949, in Herford, Germany. Wilhelmsplatz, number 7. The healing of a 9-year-old boy was noticed by the public through the press. And ever since then, people leered around the house and wanted to talk to Bruno Gröning. Many of them, who had been given up on by doctors, saw their last chance in a meeting with the unknown faith healer. The square filled up with disabled veterans and handicapped people on crutches, in wheelchairs, on litters, and in vehicles, in some of which the people were bedded on straw. And then things occurred which later filled the newspapers' headlines. Bruno Gröning faced the sufferers, talked to them in front of many bystanders, skeptics and journalists, and people received back their eyesight and stood up from their wheelchairs. Bruno Gröning took the crutches and broke them in 2 over his knee. At that time, the newspaper wrote, His word bans illness. And these words, his speeches, lectures and wisdom were collected and later embraced as the teaching of Bruno Gröning. Some eyewitnesses remembered their life long what he spoke from the balcony.
Give me your sickness and your sorrows. You cannot deal with all these. I will bear them for you.
And then he explained,
I draw your attention to the fact that one or the other of you may suffer some slight pain. These are Regelungen pain, which will disappear soon if you firmly believe in the healing. There is no incurable. God is the greatest physician.
With this, he essentially said everything. Because faith connects people again with God, so that the life force runs through them again and heals. It's hard to believe that there were people who were bothered by this, who saw in Bruno Gröning some form of danger, despite all public proof of his benevolent influence. The Agency for Public Order raised doubts. All of a sudden, people started to fight against him and to misrepresent the facts in the press. The reports suddenly became very negative. Was he even allowed to heal at all? As an uneducated man, was he even able to say,
I tell you this.
Was a man like him allowed to exist next to the church and exact science? The public authorities got nervous. The officials were not interested in the fact that at that time 80,000 people seeking help had contacted Bruno Gröning in writing, people who could expect no more help from anywhere else. Obviously, there were also men who had a different mission than he did. The campaign was distinct. Bruno Gröning should disappear. One comfort remained for the people seeking help, and that was the fact that some attained healing only by their silent plea and a mental appeal for help to Bruno Gröning. His physical presence was apparently not even necessary.
Ich war 18 Jahre, als ich zum Freundeskreis kam.
I was 18 years old when I joined the circle of friends, and I had lived through a lot beforehand. When I was about 9, I started having severe headaches, and they got worse and worse. And my parents took me to see many doctors, but it didn't get any better. And one day I woke up in the morning with a headache so bad that I banged my head against the wall in order to numb the pain. After that, my parents took me to see healing practitioners and tried all kinds of things, but nothing helped. After a couple of years, I started having knee pain as well, which also got so bad that I could hardly ride a bike. Climbing stairs was almost impossible. Walking hurt, and nobody could do anything. Next, I had problems in school. In one subject, my grades dropped. I was afraid of school. The fear got worse. At some point, I didn't dare to go to town anymore and be among people. I had no joy in life anymore. Several times I wanted to throw myself in front of a train or jump from a bridge. In the end, I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. Well, at the age of 17, I had already come to the end of my life. I had several nervous breakdowns and stress at school. My father was in the intensive care unit in hospital, and I collapsed. Then my mother heard about Bruno Gröning. And initially I couldn't accept it. I couldn't believe it. What's the point? I then read a book recommending prayer. And I thought, well, okay, what the heck? I had reached the end of the line anyway, then I might as well give it a try. I couldn't believe it, though. I lay down on my bed and I prayed with all my heart. Dear God, if you do exist, then please help me. I can't go on like this anymore. And all of a sudden, I felt tranquil, inner peace and light, and I was free. I was free of all pain. There was a feeling of happiness inside. Unfortunately, this feeling of happiness subsided very fast. I kept on praying, but the pain came back. The sadness came back. And I just couldn't get this feeling back. And it took another few months until I finally went with my mother to a gathering of the Bruno Gröning circle of friends. And there I listened. In the beginning, I was very skeptical. And then I thought, yes, I do feel something here. I perceive something. I feel the power. And, okay, why not? 1 week later, I was riding a bike with my friend. And I got severe pain in my knees. I had never experienced such a severe pain before. I had to get off the bike. I had to push it. I could hardly walk. In the end, I could hardly push my bike. I could hardly walk because of the pain, but somehow I got home. I struggled all the way home. Then I lay down in bed and thought, done, my knee is busted. Afterwards, I woke up, and ever since then, I haven't suffered any pain in my knees. It wasn't until later that I understood what had happened. I didn't realize it at the time. And at that time, I again got Regelungen with the headaches, with nausea and sensitivity to light. But this time I stuck it out and everything was cleaned out, so to speak. And ever since then, I'm free and enjoy life. I can even do exercises again, which is especially important to me, and this I truly appreciate.
Meine Fußballzeit begann in der Grundschule.
I began playing soccer in elementary school. Not much in the beginning. Then I played on a soccer field for the first time and started playing more. In the end, we hung out on the soccer field from morning until night. Later, my father took me with him to watch a match in a big stadium in Dortmund for the first time. I really liked it.
Und irgendwann kam auch der Alkohol mit dazu.
And at some point, I started drinking. Once I started my training, I had more money, so I went to the stadium more often and soon bought myself a season ticket.
Ich war eigentlich bei jedem Spiel dabei.
I was actually at every match. Luckily for me, or rather unluckily, Dortmund was having its best time. They won the championship twice in a row, just at the time when I was there. I went to Manchester to see them in the Champions League, saw them in Madrid, and at the final in Munich against Turin.
Beim Endspiel in München gegen Turin.
All we really did was drink. We started drinking early in the morning, and by the time the game started, we had no idea what was happening. We had no idea who those people were running around on the field. My friends at trade school also kept me company in drinking. We hung out in the street, always a can of beer in our hands. We drank in the morning before going to school, in the afternoon, even at school. We kept our cans of beer under the table, and the teachers didn't pay any attention to this at all. We sang during the lessons. We did stupid things all the time.
Nur noch Blödsinn. Ja, irgendwann steigerte sich das.
It reached a point at which I began to feel dissatisfied with myself. When I had had a few drinks and I was drunk, I was happy. My worries disappeared.
Sorgen verschwanden.
But the next morning they were back. This was the catch. They became twice as big. And at some point, I didn't know how to go on.
Hoch waren, nicht mehr weiter wusste irgendwann.
I had everyday concerns, everyday worries and fears about the future, and I worried about what might happen. I didn't know what to do and sought refuge in alcohol.
Und mich eigentlich in den Alkohol flüchtete. Und da fühlte ich mich dann wohl, war dann glücklich.
Then I felt good and was happy.
Die Gesundheit.
My health began to deteriorate. I was becoming less and less content with myself.
Ich wurde dann immer unzufriedener mit mir. Von den Sorgen mal abgesehen.
Beside all my worries, my training wasn't working out. I had no clue what to do.
Ich wusste überhaupt nicht, wie es weitergehen sollte. Meine Mutter war schon im Bruno Gröning Freundeskreis.
My mother had already joined the Bruno Gröning circle of friends, and I watched her, was sort of interested, but far too much attached to soccer and alcohol. After a while, I was introduced to the teaching. At first, my situation didn't really change at all. I took in the Heilstrom, the power, but continued going to the stadium and kept drinking.
Trank auch weiterhin.
At some point, I started drinking less. I noticed that the alcohol didn't really taste the same. I didn't go to every match anymore.
Ich fuhr dann auch nicht mehr zu jedem Spiel. Ich war dann auch mal auf einer Tagung.
One time, I went to a conference of the Bruno Gröning Circle of Friends, and this became more important to me. Alcohol lost its appeal.
Der Alkohol rückte in den Hintergrund.
I remember one day I was up in the stands and suddenly realized that I was holding a can of Coke in my hand, not a beer. This was a definite turning point, for I knew then that I had made it.
Und irgendwann.
And on another day I woke up in the morning and knew that's not it anymore. I suddenly had the thought, you're not going to another match. This would have been impossible before, because I might miss out on something. I couldn't even imagine them starting without me.
Ja, es wendet sich alles zum Guten hin.
But everything has turned round. And today I can say, looking back on the last few years of my life, that I have become a very content and happy human being. And I'm really grateful for this.
After the prohibition to heal and the negative reporting about him had escalated, the Review magazine came up with the idea to finance a scientific study of Bruno Gröning's healing method. Bruno Gröning was supposed to try to heal people in front of a scientific committee who were to test him. The specially chosen doctors, psychologists and physicists guaranteed Bruno Gröning that they would give him a positive evaluation if he could clearly demonstrate healings. They wanted to clear the path for him. Bruno Gröning never wanted to flaunt himself or help on command in order for skeptics to experiment with the grace of God. But in this case, he agreed, in order to get to those people who urgently needed his help. From July the 27th to August the 7th, 1949, at the University Hospital in Heidelberg, examinations of 12 selected patients showed their cases were unequivocally successful. This again confirmed that Bruno Gröning's attention led to surprising and inexplicable healings. Nevertheless, he did not get the positive evaluation he had been promised, and neither was the path cleared for him. Disappointed, he took up an invitation to go to Bavaria, to the Traberhof near Rosenheim, in order to have a few days of peace and quiet to consider his situation.
Also meine Erfahrung mit dem Freundeskreis reicht 9 Jahre zurück.
My experience with the circle of friends dates back 9 years. I came to the circle of friends through my mother. She had told me that there you could learn to heal others or yourself, which of course interested me as I was going to study medicine. I went to one of the meetings, and it was so different from what I had expected. I only went there to do my mother a favor. I thought it was all nonsense. I also threw away the picture of Bruno Gröning and did not go to another meeting for a long time. But I was young then and still lived with my parents. So I saw how they were healed, particularly my father.
Dass meine Eltern Heilung bekommen haben, besonders mein Vater.
He was freed from alcoholism. He stopped smoking. Warts on the soles of his feet vanished. His liver became better. His liver function tests had always been very bad. Varices in his esophagus went away. As my mother also got better, I then started to try it out and saw that it helped me in medical school, which I had started. At some point, my mother noticed that the chronic abdominal trouble I had had was gone, and that was how I finally landed in the circle of friends.
Ja, und so bin ich eigentlich dazu gekommen. Und mittlerweile bin ich fertige Ärztin.
In the meantime, I am now a qualified medical doctor, and here in the circle of friends, I work on the success reports, the help and healings reported by the youth in the circle of friends. That includes, for example, healings from allergies, which are very common, like milk intolerance, and also many emotional things, depression, fears, panic attacks, and also physical things, from a sprained ankle that heals more quickly to very severe chronic problems like ulcerative colitis.
Colitis ulcerosa. Warum? Das Einstellen auf
Why doing Einstellen to the Heilstrom, this divine power, helps, even we doctors here in the medical scientific group of the Circle of Friends can't explain. I think it's not our job to do so. But what we can do is show that it does help when you take it seriously and follow the teaching. We always ask for medical documents from before and after the healing to compare them. It is very important that these come from independent doctors who have nothing to do with us. Then, with our medical background, we look and see whether anything has happened or not. It is the same when you prescribe a medication. Not every medication helps every patient. Even today, we don't know why some medications help, as their mode of action is not clear. Nevertheless, they help. I think you can look at the Circle of Friends or the teaching of Bruno Gröning like that. Some people are helped immediately, others later, some not for the time being. We can't explain that. Each person is different, and our job is simply to show that this possibility exists. It doesn't cost anything, there's no obligation to stay. Everybody can decide at any time not to come back again. It is just an opportunity for many people who otherwise don't have any possibility of getting well again.
The news soon spread that Bruno Gröning was in Rosenheim. And within a few days, thousands of people searching for help flocked to the Traberhof. Those who had been vegetating away in darkened rooms were taken out to the paddocks into the light of day. People slept in tents and buses and waited for Bruno Gröning, who had been called to the north of Germany once again. And then, while he was on his way back, great things began to happen. Some people talked about an intense feeling of warmth and increased pain. They spoke about a tingling in paralyzed body parts, and then the first healings. The number of people waiting rose to as many as 30,000. Bruno Gröning arrived and went out onto the balcony. First, he silently and compassionately took in the fate of his fellow human beings, and then said,
Hundreds of years ago, man left the natural path of his belief in God. Everybody thought they could manage on their own. Now we are here on this earth. Now we live as we want to, and we will know how to help ourselves, each one thought. But I tell you that nobody can be helped without God, and whoever thinks they can do without nature, which God has so beautifully created for us, should go where He wants. People believed that they could distinguish themselves from others by turning their backs on nature and climbing the stairs of culture. That was the mistake. That's where it all went wrong. That's what's missing in people. Nature. Back to nature. Back to our Lord God. Back to believing in the good in people. You should be human to human beings. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do not be spiteful. Do not be false. Do not do anything bad to anyone. You should all be good. Good to one another. You should know that you belong together, whether you are rich or poor. Never be jealous. The best and the greatest wealth is not money as you thought. Health is wealth. Health is everything, more than money. So now open up your heart and really empty it out. Empty it of all worries and troubles. You'll never be able to deal with it all. I will carry it all for you. My back is broad.
In meiner frühesten Kindheit stellten sich depressive Zustände ein.
In my early childhood, I developed a tendency towards depression. I was longing for a love that I couldn't get in my family. After a while, I felt entirely expendable.
Die Depressionen wurden immer schlimmer.
The depression got worse and worse. The first time I went into therapy, I was 15. It was psychotherapy. At the age of 17, I was admitted into a clinic for the mentally ill for 6 weeks. After that, I took up a training to be a dental assistant. I had to abandon my education after 1 month because I was having serious suicidal thoughts.
Ich kam dann nochmal in Kur, dieses Mal für 5 Monate.
I was then admitted again into a clinic, this time for 5 months. During that time, I started smoking. Only a few cigarettes at first, then later on up to 40 a day.
Nach dieser Kur,
After the clinic, I started training again, this time to be a housekeeper. But the depression got so bad, particularly the suicidal thoughts, that a year into the training I tried to take my life for the first time. I almost succeeded. The doctor said 10 minutes later and it would have been too late.
zu spät gewesen. Ich habe zwar damals überlebt, aber ich wusste nicht, wie das
I
geht.
survived, but I didn't know how to live.
Und dadurch dauert es auch wieder nicht lange und dann
This is why I tried to take my life again, only a short time later. And then a third time. I got worse and worse.
ich musste täglich zum Arzt, bekam
I had to go to the doctor every day for injections, infusions and medication and psychotherapy once a
in
week.
der Woche eine Gesprächstherapie. Aber alles nützte nichts.
But none of it helped.
Dann nahm ich durch die ganzen Medikamente und den
I put on 55 pounds because of the medicine and not getting enough exercise.
Meistens schlief ich bis zur Mittagszeit.
On most days I slept until noon. I got up, lay on the couch, watched TV and just vegetated.
Nur noch so dahin vegetiert. Ich hatte damals lange Haare gehabt.
My hair was long at the time. I dyed it black and I only wore black clothes. I felt totally empty inside.
Dann kam
I
ich an
got to the point at which I wanted to stop all treatment, as it wasn't helping me anyway.
Und der Arzt sagte
And
mir
the doctor
damals,
said, if you do that, I can guarantee that you will fall into a deep, dark hole and you won't be able to get out by yourself.
wir haben also dann langsam
So we slowly began to cut down on medication. But in the end, I stopped it abruptly.
Danach ging ich zu Heilpraktikern.
I went to see a healing practitioner, and afterwards he told me about a man who was supposed to have helped many people.
Der vielen Menschen schon geholfen haben soll. Und ich
And I had this feeling, you're going there. That's where you'll get the help you've always longed for. And I went to the introduction, and I was told to leave all my worries and all my burdens outside and to think of something beautiful, to think of hang gliders. I simply did,
ich habe das einfach
and thought of hang gliders.
und hab,
I had nothing to lose. I had everything to gain.
ich hatte nichts zu verlieren, aber alles zu gewinnen. Ich habe damals
During this introduction, I consciously heard about God for the first time. That He helps, that there's a power, a force which can help us. And in that moment, I must have been able to let go so that this power could start working inside of me. I started to feel really sick and had to go to the bathroom 3 times in a row because I thought I was going to vomit, but nothing came out. After the introduction, I went home and I felt love and joy in a way I had never known before, and a sense of peace. And the same thing happened during my first and second community hours. And from then on, everything got better and better. And I had the courage to face life again. And the strength to stand on my own 2 feet. I wanted to start another training and I wanted to make it this time.
Dann in dem Jahr nach der Einführung
During the year after my introduction, the addiction to cigarettes was taken from me.
nach den Zigaretten genommen worden.
Since then, I don't smoke anymore. And I also lost those 55 pounds I had put on. One day, I was going back and forth in my mother's kitchen and suddenly noticed that I had not experienced that fear you get before a depression sets in. I hadn't felt it for a long time. And since then, I have been free from depression.
Kurz darauf
Soon after that, I heard about an opening for a kindergarten teacher's training, and I applied and was accepted. After 4 years, I graduated, and I am now an accredited kindergarten teacher. I love my job, and I love being with children. And I can only do this because this love was put into my heart.
Und anfangs ist es mir aufgefallen, dass die Arbeitskollegen
At the beginning, I noticed how my colleagues observed how I was with the children. But I can only do this from the love which was given to me.
Und vor 6 Jahren
6 years ago, I was allowed to establish a singing group that I still lead, which continues to add to my happiness. And today I simply know that there are no upward limits.
But also in Bavaria, Bruno Gröning was prohibited from healing. So he withdrew into the mountains for a while. Bruno Gröning's throat, which looks very big in some photos, was also a topic in the press back then. He explained it in this way.
I do not have goiter. It is a gland. And when I can speak to many people, this gland becomes very big, and I feel very well. When I speak to fewer people, it gets smaller, and I still feel well. When I'm only allowed to speak to very few people, it becomes very tight, and I do not feel well at all. And if they forbid me to work at all, I will burn up inside.
At that time, nobody knew that all the power which had healed thousands of people in various places passed through Bruno Gröning's body. Also what he experienced when he said,
"Give me your burden,"
is well beyond what we can imagine.
Mein Gesicht war total entstellt.
My face was totally disfigured by severe acne, which developed over just a few days. Before this, I'd always been healthy and good-humored. But after that happened, I went downhill. It was a fateful blow for me.
Auch Medikamente konnten nicht helfen.
No medication helped.
Fachärzte waren ratlos.
The doctors were puzzled.
Es kamen Nebenwirkungen dazu von den Medikamenten.
Apart from that, the medication had side effects. The acne kept getting worse instead of better, even though I totally trusted the doctors.
Und ich habe mich verkrochen im Haus meiner Eltern.
I hid in my parents'
Ich
house.
wollte nicht mehr raus.
I didn't want to go out anymore. I didn't want to come into contact with people because I'd experienced their primitive comments.
Und in dieser Situation kam meine Tante,
During this time, my aunt came to visit, my favorite aunt, and she gave me a cassette about Bruno Gröning and said I should listen to it, which I did, and felt totally relaxed while doing so. And then I felt a trickling sensation in my body, which turned into a flowing feeling, and then joy. Such joy. I had to laugh and laugh and laugh. All the depression was suddenly gone, just like that.
Und ich bin dann wieder rausgegangen auf die Straße, habe mit
I went out again and talked to people. I took the bus again, took the tram, which I couldn't do before because of the comments people made.
eben wegen dieser Sprüche, die dann losgelassen wurden. Ja, zum Beispiel.
Things like, I'd rather shoot myself than go around looking like that.
Und dann
And then the acne faded.
klang aus diese Akne dann ab.
It went.
Und dann war auch
And then I had the
Wunsch,
wish to pass this on to others, so that they could also experience it.
Ich bin dann mit einem Freund nach Kuba geflogen.
I went to Cuba with a friend, and we talked about Bruno Gröning there. And spontaneous healings
Es
happened.
sind Spontanheilungen eingetreten. Wir haben dort
We spoke Esperanto there. I wasn't even very good at it back then. I was only 22 years old.
erst 22 Jahre alt. Aber es
But it
ging
still
gut.
went well, and the healings happened anyway.
Eine jüngere Frau, auch eine Esperantistin,
A young woman who also spoke Esperanto was terminally ill when we met her for the first time. The doctors had given up on her and sent her home to die,
und haben sie zum Sterben nach Hause geschickt.
but she got the full healing and is still healthy.
Und ist immer noch gesund. Auch nach 6 Jahren.
And that was 6 years ago. And she's very grateful for it. This is my joy, when people experience this sort of happiness. Another 18-year-old from Cuba suffered from food allergies, and there were lots of different foods she couldn't eat. She had such swellings, edema over her whole body, and I could really empathize with her, because she also hid herself away at home, and didn't go to school anymore because she was so embarrassed.
Schule gegangen ist.
She also received a full healing after the lecture.
Aber die hat nach einem Vortrag die volle Heilung bekommen. Und es hat auch vielen anderen noch geholfen.
And many other people were helped too.
Und man kann hier wirklich
You can do a lot of good on this earth, even as a young person.
Mein Bruder und ich sind im ehemaligen Jugoslawien
My
geboren.
brother and I were born in the former Yugoslavia, but grew up in Germany. I've been interested in health and things like that since my youth, and most of all, things to do with getting clarity about life, to just know which direction I should take, or what the right thing to do is.
Einfach zu wissen, wo es lang gehen soll oder was denn jetzt das Richtige ist. Und mit 22 Jahren
When I was 22, I was introduced to Bruno Gröning's teaching by a college classmate.
seitdem hat sich mein Leben,
I can say that since then my life has gradually changed completely.
es ist alles irgendwie gut verlaufen, alles irgendwie gut geworden.
Everything has somehow gone well. For one thing, my studies went well. I finished my degree with good grades. I found a good job and get along well with my colleagues. I also noticed that simply taking in the power and asking for certain things really brings results. Also, one's inner attitude. The inner spiritual attitude can crucially change one's life.
Das Leben verändern kann. Ja, und ein halbes Jahr
And
später
half a year after I was introduced, my brother followed.
Ja, bei mir war es so gewesen, dass ich...
In my case, I was 24 years old, and instead of finishing my degree in business administration, by which I mean making sure that I got through all the exams, I was busy with other things.
Mit einer Sache beschäftigt. Ich habe einen sogenannten totalen Umweltschutzfimmel gehabt.
I was totally into environmental protection. I soaked up everything which was reported about it, where things were being destroyed all over the world, about the rainforests in Brazil, and I stored these facts in my head and constantly brooded about them and thought about them, and finally came to the conclusion that the human race is simply bad, and I started to see people as parasites on this earth.
Das steigerte sich dann immer wieder.
This got worse and worse. I tormented my friends and everyone I knew with it. It was the only subject I talked about. I wanted to convert everyone, get them to change, so that they would only use recycled paper. My classmates at university should only use recycled toilet paper and only eat organic food. And everyone said, "He's going nuts."
You also sold your car.
Ja, das kam auch noch dazu.
That was part of it. I made the decision to sell my car because I didn't want to pollute the air anymore.
Das heißt, die Luft nicht mehr verpesten wollte. Das war also ganz schlimm gewesen.
It had gotten really bad. I noticed in the mornings when I woke up how exhaust fumes from the street came in the window and that it was contaminating me. I could see it visually. It was really bad. It was a really terrible time.
Eine ganz schlimme Zeit war das gewesen. Ja, und dann kam mein Bruder mit...
Then my brother came along and told me about Bruno Gröning, and I have to say it was just in the nick of time. I could accept it right away. Everything he told me about it. That there was somebody who did good things, who helped people for free, and that healings really occurred. It simply fascinated me, and this has never diminished since then.
Und seitdem auch nicht mehr losgelassen. Und es kam dann ganz schnell der Wunsch auf, einfach zu helfen. Und
very quickly, I had the wish to help. As we already said, we come from the former Yugoslavia, specifically from Croatia.
Wie gesagt, einfach der Wunsch jetzt...
I simply had the wish to translate the introduction material and other books in order to bring these to people in our home country.
Landsleuten in der Heimat einfach zu bringen. Ja, und das ist dann einfach geschehen. Wir haben einfach...
That happened. We started to translate the introduction booklet, the introduction cassette and so on.
War es halt eben so gewesen, dass ich Ende 94 meinen...
And then at the end of 1994, I could fulfill my life's wish to go back to Croatia.
Angefangen mit dem Übersetzen haben wir dann...
I started with the translating, and this developed further. First we started communities in Zagreb, where I now live, and in other cities in Croatia. In practically all of Croatia, we now also have youth and children's communities. We have communities in Slovenia, in Macedonia, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Das heißt also, wir konnten da schon vieles tun und das Wichtigste...
We could already do a lot, and the important thing was that I went back at a time when the war was still going on, and the people of the former Yugoslavia were all fighting each other. This was mainly a religious conflict, and now the most important task is to bring the people back together again. And this also happens in the communities.
Diese Völker wieder zusammenzuführen, und das geschieht auch in den Gemeinschaften. Da sitzen nämlich die Moslems mit den Katholiken.
There, the Muslims sit together with the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians and take in the Heilstrom together. They tell how they have been relieved of the hatred, how they have forgiven, and thereby have become healthy again. And this is very obvious. I was able to experience this on the lecture tour we just had in Sarajevo and Mostar. The war was at its worst in those places.
Als Kind hatte ich einen stark überzogenen Gerechtigkeitssinn.
As a child, I had an exaggerated sense of fairness. This scared my mother, and she was very worried. She wondered what would become of me when I was older.
Wenn ich die Nachrichten sah und man zeigte da irgendwas von Attentaten.
When I watched the news on TV and saw something about assassinations, I would always think, the terrorists have to be punished. I would picture how that could be done.
Ich habe dann angefangen,
Then I started learning martial arts to protect myself and also to be able to take hard-hitting measures in case of doubt.
aber ich habe dann mehr und mehr
But then I noticed more and more that it couldn't go on that way.
Meine Mutter hat mir gezeigt, wie man diese göttliche Kraft in sich aufnimmt.
My mother showed me how to absorb this divine force myself, how you can simply ask for harmony and power.
Und ich habe damals dann starkes Gelenkrheuma verloren.
At that time, I'd been suffering from severe and often crippling rheumatoid arthritis, which then went away.
Im Laufe der Zeit merkte ich dann auch,
I also noticed as time went by that I had increasing inner harmony, how these hateful feelings and thoughts abated, as well as thoughts of revenge.
oder auch diese Rachegedanken. Ich erkannte immer mehr, dass es da ganz andere Lösungen gibt.
I realized more and more that there were other solutions, that it's important to be able to forgive people and also to be able to feel love.
Und einfach auch die Liebe empfinden zu können.
And then it became easier and easier. I repeatedly felt how this love was suddenly inside me.
Ja, und ich kann sagen, dass ich heute total frei bin.
I can say that today I'm totally free from all of that,
Dass ich einfach wieder glücklich
that I
sein
can
kann.
simply be happy again. I know for sure that you can achieve everything through love.
Dass man durch die Liebe alles erreichen kann.
After Bruno Gröning was legally prohibited from healing, local communities composed of healed people and new seekers of help were formed, which merged together into an association. They invited Bruno Gröning to come as a speaker in order to find a legal way to meet with him. So he travelled to his friends and was able to help in this way on a small scale in private events. He called his lectures community hours. At these events, he revealed to the friends the forces and physical laws among which man actually lives, and how he has to act in order to be able to successfully persist in the struggle for survival. Often, he would answer thoughts which someone was having at a particular moment. His instructions were clear. There was no shilly-shallying.
Don't think about peeling potatoes or what you're going to cook this evening. Concentrate on your body and what you perceive.
One day, Bruno Gröning met Josette Dufossé, and soon thereafter, she became his wife. Together, they moved into one half of the two-family house at 117 Dorndreher Street in Plochingen. Despite the healing ban, seekers of help continually went there to see him or called him on the telephone. Then, the great trial against him was started. Violation of the healing practitioner's law and involuntary manslaughter by preventing a doctor's visit were the charges. They wanted to get rid of him once and for all. His opponents had joined forces to fight him through slander and false testimony. Thus began for Bruno Gröning the most difficult chapter of his life.
Es ist nun mehr als ein Jahrzehnt, dass ich
I have known of the Bruno Gröning circle of friends for more than a decade now. Back then, my father took me along to the community hours, and I must say that although I felt that what was said there and the reports were authentic, I was unable to see any use in the teachings for me personally. I went on living my life just as before, until I came to the point at which I was really at my wit's end.
war zum einen
For one thing, I had developed into a very aggressive person. In town and at school, I was known as a bully. At some point, it was no longer possible for me to sit normally in a bus. I always had to pick on someone and would very soon be involved in a fight.
zum anderen waren meine schulischen Leistungen.
For another, my achievement in school was, to be precise, miserable. But there was a difference. I actually had the desire and the will to better myself and also to perform well. I knew that I needed decent grades for the occupation I wanted to pursue.
Und so setzte ich mich tatsächlich hin und nahm
So, wanting to learn, I actually sat down and picked up a book, but it was always the same. I could sit in front of the book staring at the pages for hours, just daydreaming. Sometimes I would force myself to read,
ich las das dann. Und danach
but then when I closed the book, I wouldn't have the faintest idea what I've read.
und
Irgendwann war es dann so weit, dass dann...
At some point, my teacher was at her wit's end and sent me to a psychotherapist.
Und der hat mir dann verdeutlicht, wo ich stehe und wo ich angekommen bin.
He made my position very clear to me. I then arrived at the point at which I just wanted to get out of this life.
Und da war ich zum ersten Mal bereit, Bitte zu sagen.
At that time, I was ready to say please for the first time. I remembered what had been said in the community hours, and suddenly I could clearly see what the principle was, and I did exactly that. I simply asked Bruno Gröning to turn my life around. I simply believed that he would do it, regardless of how illusory it appeared to me at the time. What happened then I can only describe with two things. The first was that suddenly I felt such energy, strength and determination, the likes of which I had never felt before. I went to libraries and took out books.
Jedes Fach in der Schule war auf einmal interessant, vorher so öde und dann auf
I was interested in everything. All the subjects at school were suddenly interesting. What was so tedious before, I was suddenly determined to do. The fight simply stopped. I just kept away from those things. My grades went from D's and F's to A's. Later, they had improved so much that I was able to skip the 10th and 11th grades. Then I had my diploma in the bag, enabling me to choose the occupation and higher education I desired.
Ja, und dann kam etwas. Ich hatte mich
And then something else happened. I had gotten used to success. I had learned to absorb the power and was full of drive. But suddenly something else was there. Ambition. And I did even more. I invested more and more time. I had to succeed. Successes didn't make me happy anymore. Then the next success which I had to have would come. At a conference I asked myself, what is this? What drives me towards this power? What drives me towards social status? What is it that always drives me so much towards success, which doesn't, however, bring me the happiness which I am actually seeking?
Und da war ich.
I had come to the point at which I inwardly felt only one wish, that all this vanity, all the arrogance be taken from me.
Dass mir diese ganze Eitelkeit, dieser ganze Hochmut genommen würde. Und was dann geschah, das ist für mich.
What happened then, for me, is the real success in my life.
Dann, ja.
I'm at a loss for words. The first thing that happened was in my family. My parents had separated when I was still young. My relationships with my father and mother were more or less abstract. I knew that he was my father and she was my mother. You like them. You are nice to them. It was the same with my siblings.
Und dann auf einmal, als ich diesen Schritt getan hatte,
But suddenly when I took that step, when I simply asked for order in my heart, I found such love for my parents. And suddenly there was pride and a feeling which I can't describe.
Ich kann es nicht beschreiben. Und ich hatte dann, es war für mich.
That was a big step for me back then.
Ich bin dann zum ersten Mal zu meinem Vater hin.
I went to my father for the first time and told him that I loved him.
Und ja, und es änderte sich so viel in meiner Familie.
And so much changed in my family. I had an entirely different relationship with my siblings. There was suddenly such love in my heart, such joy, and there was no longer the drive to achieve something. I suddenly realized that my ambition had been an expression of poverty.
Seit meiner Kindheit hatte ich Kopfschmerzen und Schwindelgefühl.
I had suffered since childhood from headaches and vertigo, which at first occurred occasionally and gradually got worse and worse. Also, I never felt really well, even as a child. Then, when I was 12 years old, standing at a bus stop, I blacked out. I fainted and hit my head on the pavement.
Und schlug mit dem Kopf auf das Pflaster auf. Hatte dann eine Platzwunde am Kopf.
I had a laceration on my head, and when I came to, the ambulance was already there to take me to the hospital.
Dort wurde ich mehrere Tage.
I was examined for several days, and they said it was a growth disorder and nervous system ailment. Nothing could be done about it. I had to live with it.
Ich habe gedacht,
I thought, at 12 years of age, okay, that was a one-time event and will never happen again.
aber es kam immer wieder.
But it did happen again and again, over 10 years at irregular intervals. I would simply black out and fall down, whether at my place of training, at the doctor's, or at school.
Ich hatte Angst.
I was afraid to go out or to walk between the rows of high shelves at a department store.
Mit dem Auto zu fahren.
I was afraid to drive a car for fear of having an accident.
Das Leben war für mich damals eine Qual.
My life was torture back then.
Und dann 10 Jahre später.
10 years later, I fainted unexpectedly once or twice every 3
Die
months.
sich nicht vorher ankündigten.
I was nervous, irritable, and lethargic. I no longer took pleasure in life.
Hatte keine Lust mehr am Leben. Ich
I had even considered taking my own life.
selbst das Leben zu nehmen. Als ich 23 Jahre alt war,
When I was 23 years old, I learned from my parents about the teaching of Bruno Gröning.
ich wurde dann eingeführt.
I was introduced to it, but at first couldn't believe that this teaching could help me at all.
Diese Lehre helfen kann. Ich habe es dann geprüft.
I tested it, and when I absorbed the power, I had exactly the same Regelungen as before. However, I couldn't accept that as Regelungen in the beginning, because the headaches, the same feeling, appeared just as before.
Genauso auf wie vor. Und dann hat es ein halbes Jahr gedauert.
It took me 6 months before I was able to understand what Regelungen were. Then the connection finally sank in. When I absorbed the power, believing that I will become well, it's simply a cleansing process in my body.
Und dann fuhr ich wieder.
And then I went along again to an introductory lecture. And there I separated myself inwardly from what wasn't right in my body.
Und dort wurde ich auch ohnmächtig.
And there too, I passed out and slipped off my chair. When I came to again, there was a voice inside me which said, "Now all will be well," and everything was different.
Ich konnte danach rausgehen.
After that incident, I was able to walk out on my own, while earlier I would have had to prop up my legs and spend 2 days in bed.
Und dann, seit diesem Tag,
Since that day, I have never fainted again. And I'm happy with my life.
und ich freue mich jetzt des Lebens.
I've become a different person.
Ich bin ein anderer Mensch geworden.
Bruno Gröning in court. Much could be said about this trial, which went on for many years, but the following will suffice. Bruno Gröning regretted that he had to prepare everything himself for his lawyers because they hadn't at all understood the magnitude of the battle. It wasn't a matter of worldly laws, but rather of the elimination of a man who had called for the great turnaround in his lectures. who had made it plain to the people what was going on here on earth, and what the alternative would be if they could gain knowledge of the divine laws. Former wheeler dealers, who Bruno Gröning himself had denounced for embezzlement of donated funds, suddenly appeared as accusers. The most unreliable of them weren't even sworn in. The defense witnesses Bruno Gröning had hoped to include weren't admitted at all. Many a Bruno Gröning friend present in the courtroom for the proceedings would probably have liked to intervene as Bruno Gröning exposed himself to the humiliating word battles and twisted interpretations of the judge and prosecutor. Yet he remained calm. He surely must have thought sometimes of the one who had sent him on this path back then in the woods. This trial, and the prohibition to heal or speak, continued on until the end of his life. He recorded some last words and some community hours on tape until he died unexpectedly at 52 years of age on January the 26th, 1959. About this day, he had once said,
"It will be the most beautiful hour of my life, when I will be able to return home to my Father, to the glory of God."
I am happy that I've found this path. Not for anything in the world would I like to go back to the way I was before, and I am excited about the life which is in front of me.
And only afterwards did I realize what had happened. I wasn't really aware at first.
And it happened without any symptoms of addiction or withdrawal. It simply disappeared from one day to the next, and I don't think that's usual.
I remember one day I was up in the stands and suddenly realized that I was holding a can of Coke in my hand, not a beer. That was a definite turning point, for I knew then that I had made it.
And I simply know there are no upward limits.
Und man kann hier wirklich,
You can do a lot of good on this earth, even as a young person.
auch als junger Mensch,
Kraft aufnehmen und
Simply taking in the power and asking for certain things really brings results. Also, one's inner attitude, the inner spiritual attitude, can crucially change one's life.
At some point, my mother noticed that the chronic pelvic inflammation I had had was gone, and that was how I finally landed in the circle of friends.
In order to bring this to people in our home country, that happened. We started to translate the introduction booklet, the introduction cassette, and so on.
Es war für mich damals ein sehr großer Schritt.
That was a big step for me back then. I went to my father and for the first time I told him that I loved him.
Und habe ihm gesagt, dass ich ihn lieb habe.
Wie das zusammenhängt.
Then the connection finally sank in, when I absorbed the power, believing that I will become well. It's simply a cleansing process in my body.
There is much that cannot be explained, but nothing which cannot happen.